today respond with four of us to the speech given by President Joe Biden yesterday in response to the ISIS-K attack in Afghanistan that killed, at most recent count that I heard, 95 Afghanis, 16 American, or 13 American soldiers wounded, hundreds and hundreds of others. An atrocious attack. And every president of the United States has to respond in times like that. Joe Biden chose to use a particular passage from Isaiah chapter 6, from the Jewish scripture that's also held very dearly by Christians. And as three Christians, Shane Claiborne, Robb Ryerse, Doug Pagitt, and I, that talk about faith and politics and the common good, and then joined by, in a little bit here, by Joseph Edelheit, Rabbi Joseph Edelheit, to respond. We wanted to give some responses to this. We've been talking for a long time in a lot of our situations and settings here about Christian nationalism and religious nationalism. And regardless of who the president is or what political party someone is in or what other views someone holds, issues of Christian nationalism can still show up. And I feel like this is one of those. While it's not specifically the use of Christian texts, it was the use of Jewish scripture that Christians hold dearly as their own text as well. And it really smacks of this very question: should we use this passage? It's the phrase from Isaiah where the Lord says to the prophet, says to the prophet, who will go on my behalf? And the prophet says, "Here I am, Lord, send me." And you'll hear the clip in a minute that Joe Biden chose to use that, as have other leaders, military leaders. It's a common phrase used in military leadership. So we popped together some people to respond to this question and want to get after it. So Shane, thanks for being here today. Rob, thanks for being here. Shane, you have any initial thoughts? Shane's got a bit of a glitchy internet connection. So Rob, we'll just go right to you. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Shane. So, you can keep.
Yeah. Got a little internet.
Yeah, Shane, I think it's not gonna. It's coming and going. It was going earlier. So, Rob, give it a shot here. What are you thinking?
So, I think it's important to say a couple of things at the top. I was really kind of horrified when I saw this video clip, and I didn't watch the speech live, but I was on Twitter last night and saw that someone had shared this clip and was horrified by it, quite frankly. I think I'm probably during the course of this conversation going to be pretty critical of President Biden's use of Isaiah 6 and probably going to be pretty critical of some of the other things he said in the course of the speech as being kind of wrongheaded. Now, I say that also recognizing a couple of really important things. One is the president is in a tremendously difficult situation. It's really to be in the midst of pulling out of Afghanistan, which I think that we should have done long ago. And he's finally the one doing that, which I applaud. Seeing kind of the chaos that is happening in the midst of that, recognizing that some of that might have been avoidable, might not have been avoidable, maybe it was all inevitable. And then to have this attack on top of that, which complicates then, what ought to be the response to that? Does that impact the decisions he's made? I mean, he's in a tremendously difficult situation, and I just want to acknowledge that. All of us have strong opinions and thoughts about this. None of us have the authority to, send men and women into war, and so that's something that I recognize it weighs heavy on him. And I also want to recognize that he's a military father. He's had a son who has served and has been in our military, and has, because of that, has a unique perspective on things. And I think that's important to recognize. I think, when he takes a moment of silence and observes that, that Donald Trump Jr. tweeted as being a sign of weakness, I actually see as a great sign of strength and appreciate that. So I think I just want to recognize that this is a complicated and nuanced situation. And I posted my a bit of a criticism of President Biden on Facebook last night, and immediately, I had a bunch of Republican friends jump in and use this as opportunity to call him an idiot and other things like that. And I think I'm like, listen, if Donald Trump had said the same thing, you wouldn't be criticizing him, you'd be cheering him. So I think this isn't a time for kind of political, trying to score points politically. And I think the people that are doing that are really misguided. I worked real hard to try to help Joe Biden get elected president, and I'm happy that he did, and I would do that again. Because the alternative of Donald Trump was just so reprehensible. But just because I've supported him and worked hard to get him elected doesn't mean that he is beyond criticism. And this is one of those times where I think what he has said really reflects a misguided understanding of the Bible and a misguided understanding of Christians and
Rob, let's. I want to get
nation.
to I want to get to playing it so people can see it, because there's a lot of context. There's a lot of context there. Shane, do you have anything to say? Are you back on audio wise? You want to say before I play the video? All right, we'll give Shane a chance to catch up. All right, here's the clip from Joe Biden yesterday.
Served through the ages have drawn inspiration from the book of Isaiah, when the Lord says, "Whom shall I send? Who shall go for us?" The American military has been answering for a long time. "Here I am, Lord, send me. Here I am, send me." Each one of these women and men of our armed forces are the heirs of that tradition of sacrifice, of volunteering to go in harm's way, to risk everything, not for glory, not for profit, but to defend what we love and the people we love.
All right, so there it is, right? This is the classic argument, and I think you're right, Rob. It's good to lay out the fact that this is a complicated situation, all of that. But the choice to use a biblical text as the rationale and justification for what a president has to do to fulfill the president's duty in the military, that is not a difficult situation. So there are a couple of questions to be addressed here. One of them is, what should we do as the United States? What should our military response be? All of that, and there's a lot of room for conversation there. I'm one who believes on that. Violence breeds more violence, and if anything shows you that, it's this. At some point, we went into Afghanistan because there was an attack on the United States, and then the people who were in Afghanistan are now trying to defend themselves, and then they're going to have other groups attacking them, and violence is breeding violence. Separate conversation in my mind, and all the difficulty that there is of what the responsibility is of a president. What we're dealing with here is not even the rationale for what was your decision to act. This is a messaging choice. And in a 9-minute and 48-second speech, the president chose the center of that speech at 4 minutes and 28 seconds. So if you're constructing a speech, the center point of it is to talk about the loss of life, and he was very empathic and very kind and very knowing about what it means to lose someone, and that part of the speech was classic Joe Biden. And then this part was classic every president of the United States. Yeah. This is the use of this passage, the use of biblical texts to try to frame the context of our military action. That's not just a Joe Biden thing. In fact, a lot of people that I've asked about this over the last number of hours, 24 hours or less, have all said, well, this is the kind of thing that's not uncommon. This is what people say. This is how we frame the military. I don't even argue with that this is how we talk about it. This is how we frame the military. And I think we should stop doing it.
Yeah.
I think we have to stop framing our military in terms of biblical mandates.
Yeah.
You can make an argument that, yes, the people who volunteer to be in the military are offering themselves up in some means that is similar to the book of Isaiah. But every person who offers themselves to do something of anything is. I mean, there's just no correlation between the text of Isaiah 6, which is the Lord saying, who's going to be my spokesperson to try to bring an end to violence in early Mesopotamian culture and with the rise of Hebrew faith and religion, with people who volunteer to be employees of the United States military. So that's where I think the problem is. And what I think is hard for some of us to do is to not conflate all the other difficulties or our support with Joe Biden. Like you, I mean, I supported Joe Biden before he was the nominee. I wanted the guy to be president in 1988. Like, I've just been a Joe Biden fan, right? So yeah, I'm all there. But this choice to use this text to frame your military as the setup for what's going to be said moments later, which is, we're going to hunt you down and you are going to pay. Boy, that is just using the Bible to try to justify all kinds of things.
And make the case for military service. Make the case for people to to volunteer and to be a part of the U.S. military. Leave the Bible out of it. That's like this is not necessarily a criticism of celebrating the sacrifice made by United States military service people. It's the use of a passage that is very specifically about this encounter. And for people that may or may not know this, in Isaiah 6 is where this comes from. It's this scene where Isaiah has this vision of God. He sees God on the throne, and holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. It's this transformative scene that happens for Isaiah as he has this religious experience. And at the end of that, God says, who's going to go for me? Who's going to be my spokesman? Who am I going to send? And Isaiah says, here I am, send me. And one of the things I love in that passage, it just Isaiah says, I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell among a people of unclean lips. And an angel goes to and takes like a coal from the altar and puts it on Isaiah's lips to purify them. And I used to, when I was in college and lived in a dorm, I used to quote that verse and say, I'm a man of unclean lips, and I dwell among a people of unclean lips. That's how I used to describe my dormitory in college. But what Joe Biden did here is he took this passage, which is not a general passage about service. It's not a generic inspirational quote that you would Google, like inspirational quote about service. Like, that's not what this is. This is a transformative experience that Isaiah has, that where this calling that he receives guides him throughout his life in very prophetic, anti-violent, anti-empire ministry. And it is completely flipping that on its head, which is just kind of infuriating for someone who takes that passage seriously and wants to.
And look, and I think Joe Biden probably takes that passage seriously.
Yes,
I think Joe Biden is a person of great faith. This is in some ways not only an interpretive argument that we want to have on the appropriate use of the biblical text, but it's also an argument about, should presidents of the United States use texts like this in this way, which again doesn't have anything to do with what Donald Trump has done, doesn't have anything to do with what other presidents has done. This is our moment to talk about how should our political leaders, when we're going to use the full force of the United States military. And let's just be clear, the passage in Isaiah says, here I am, Lord, send me. The Lord is not sending these soldiers to action Joe Biden's
right.
been very clear that he understands the weight on the president of the United States, that the weight on a president is that the president holds that responsibility. And so even the choice of that particular interaction from a biblical text where the Lord is saying to an individual and the individual is responding to the Lord, to somehow then insert a group of people who volunteer for the military under the command of a president in an elected democracy, it turns it into a religious war narrative that I think we should stop doing. This is the larger point. Shane, is your audio back and able to respond? We'll just keep checking in with Shane. If not, we'll look at his wonderful little face here. Yeah, and look, I mean, I see people's comments here too, and I can feel people Go ahead, Shane. We'll take you in a broken up fashion.
Well, I just think I won't say much. I keep thinking of the words of William Stringfellow when he said that our job is not to read the Bible Americanly, but to allow the Bible to be our interpretive lens for the world we live in. And, Isaiah talked about beating swords into plows and studying violence no more. He talked about in Isaiah 9, it's every warrior's boot you got on, every road destined for burning. But it's on to prophets, and the government will be on his shoulders. So for those of us that are Christians, Jesus is the lens through which we're interpreting the world. And Joe Biden is very committed to that Christian faith. And Jesus says, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye. You've heard it said, hate your enemies. But I tell you, love your enemies. I tell you, turn the other cheek. And so I think one of the questions that's raised is, can we follow the Prince of Peace and simultaneously be commander-in-chief of the biggest carry compound in the world, with that has bombs 80 times stronger than Hiroshima, that's spending $20,000 a second on war, and is still saying we will hunt you down even as we're trying to pull out our troops? So this idea that Jesus said you pick up the sword, you die by the sword, we've learned that lesson for 20 years in Afghanistan. It's time to stop pursuing we're going to world of violence.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks, Shane. I think people were able to piece that all together. That's look, I think your argument's right. You've helped me personally. You've helped me a lot thinking about those passages. And I know, look, this is a difficult situation when a person's religious commitment collides with their professional or their civic obligations. They don't always go hand in hand. I get that. So sometimes people feel this conflict. Can a person be of Jesus following faith and have the ability to use nuclear weapons? Difficult. Send people into war. It's a difficult call. We don't need to make it more difficult by picking certain passages and recasting our military in the sense that what they're doing is equated with what the prophet Isaiah did. Frankly, had this just been on, Veterans Day and Biden had stood up on Veterans Day and said, I want to speak about the military, they're like the people that they use inspiration from the book of Isaiah chapter 6, when the Lord said, whom shall I send? And they said, Lord, send me. I would have been out here saying, presidents should stop using biblical text to justify military volunteerism, or recasting our military. So in some ways, and this can be irritating to some people, it's not only about Afghanistan at this very moment, right? It's not only about what's happened in this one very moment. It's what's happened across the board with the use of the military as a stand-in for the Isaiah 6 passage, which again, it wasn't like Joe Biden came up with this on his own. There's a very well-trodden argument that's used around the military quite often.
Yeah, and I think, Doug, we talk a lot about Christian nationalism as a part of the work that we do at Vote Common Good, and the danger of Christian nationalism. This idea that America is a Christian nation that has some unique destiny that is determined by the Christian God, and what that does to our culture, what that does to how we treat people from other countries, how we engage militarily around the world. All of that gets shaped by this kind of Christian nationalism ethos that is so a part of it. It is the the water that we swim in. And so I think, what's a little bit frustrating is that we saw the Christian nationalism thing come, like, it was very out in the open, very front forward, during the Trump administration. It was something that he used often to appeal to evangelical voters and to kind of keep them in line. And I think we were probably hoping that, well, maybe we can get a little reprieve from that. And this is an example of, like, actually, no, we're not getting a reprieve from that. Like, this idea of Christian nationalism is so deeply seated in our culture and in our political climate that, so many people hear Joe Biden quote Isaiah 6 and they don't think anything of it. Like, yeah, of course, it's no big deal. And I think there's, I think it's illustrative of just how deeply rooted the idea of Christian nationalism is, not just on the right, but across the board in our political climate.
It's really well said. I'm sort of watching the comments that come in on the stream, just so people know we push this out on multiple social media streams at one time, so you don't always see all the comments in whatever stream you're on, but I see them here, and so do Rob and Shane, and Rabbi Joseph Edelheit will join us in a moment. And there's a whole other conversation going on about, well, it's better than Trump. Yes, look, on 1,000 times over, every scale, Joe Biden is better than Donald Trump. I mean, no one will be more committed to saying that on a daily basis than the people on this call, without question. That's not the standard. Donald Trump is not the standard. Donald Trump was, in my estimations, a failure of a president at sort of every level. The standard here is, what rationale should we use on August 26th and August 27th to justify military action? And I think, and Rabbi Joseph Edelheit will be on here in a minute, and he has a different view on this. He thinks, if I read him right from an earlier email exchange we had, that this passage can be used in a more broader sense of volunteerism. I think that the use of military language, or the use of Isaiah biblical language to justify military action, is very dangerous to this country. I think it's bad for the country, and I think it's bad for the scriptures, and I think it's bad for the people who hold their faith that utilizes those scriptures and holds them dear. So this is the conflict we're having. So I'm glad that people are arguing out whether Joe Biden is a better president than Donald Trump, and to articulate clearly Donald Trump's failures. Feel free to have at it all you like in the world of all this. I will just say it's much more difficult to answer the question, how should we be living in this world, than simply, is Donald Trump the best option of all this? Okay, Joseph Edelheit, my rabbi, good to see you. Glad to have you on. Tell us where you're coming from today, and give a little context to the good people.
I'm in Rio de Janeiro, and you wrote me last night, and when Doug Pagitt writes, I make sure I find myself where I can be in conversation with you. I listened to the president in extraordinary pain yesterday. Whenever he relates to the military, we're getting a president who is a father.
Yeah.
And a father who relates to a son who died. Yesterday, I heard something I've not heard before, a causal link between his late son's returning from Iraq, Afghanistan, and their finding a brain tumor, as if there was some causal relationship. But he places himself with mourning family members. And I don't think he does this as an act. He truly sees himself as a human being who shares beyond even empathy. He is a parent who still grieves for his son. and that's who spoke to us yesterday. Now, he uses Isaiah 6. Isaiah 6 is one of the most enigmatic, at times problematic passages in the Hebrew Bible. It's a chapter referred to as the call.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he quotes from Isaiah 6:8, but we have to contextualize. Isaiah was a priest. Isaiah was someone who did not want to be called, not dissimilar from Moses. And in fact, there are images that both Moses and Isaiah share. And the specific passage
Mm-hmm.
is a powerful image in which Isaiah has had a seraph, a flaming, imagined six-winged kind of image of late biblical angels. Seraph shouldn't be translated, whatever it was, passing a hot coal over the lips of the prophet as a cleansing act. Metaphoric. And then the prophet says, I hear.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Who shall I send? Okay. As I wrote you this morning, I believe that this passage was quoted with regard to those who volunteer to serve in the armed forces. We no longer have, as I faced, now approaching 75, a draft. People who serve in the armed forces today volunteer. They offer their services. In that construct, the passage is, who will go and serve our country? And these individuals said, I will, send me. I don't see this passage in reference specifically to, and you will pay for this, referencing ISIS-K. I see this passage as valorizing those who are there as members of the U.S. Armed Forces in its various branches, serving on our behalf to evacuate everyone. I don't see this in any relationship to vengeance.
All right. So, Joseph, here, I want to ask you this because I just disagree with you on this one. I think for any, and you, as you know, I have a rule and I keep that rule as best I ever can. If I'm ever going to speak publicly, specifically about a Jewish text, I message you as soon as I possibly can to get your feedback, your input, your approval. But on this one, my rabbi, I see it differently. I think it's inappropriate to use the Isaiah 6 call passage to justify someone joining the military. And I think we have to be more careful with our military than anything else. Like if someone volunteers for AmeriCorps and someone stands up and says, this reminds me of the people who appreciate Isaiah chapter 6, where the prophet says, here I am, Lord, send me. Well, all of you are also responding to your own call. And now I think even the use of that is really sort of particular, like to universalize this call passage as anytime someone volunteers for anything. You probably shouldn't open a PTO meeting with this. You probably shouldn't talk about the Cub Scouts or a baseball game. But the military is even more dangerous in my view, because what they are going to do in the military, and President Biden linked these things together by saying our military does this and I will use the military, and we'll play that video here in a minute, that part of the speech. It was a 9-minute speech. And so in the course of that, within 3 minutes, he linked these two together. Now, a president has the right to send military troops. I don't think the president should be using Isaiah texts to say people in the military are responding to the Lord's call and being sent by the Lord. Now, someone may try to say, no, he's just using it as a volunteer passage. But I think he knows it's tapping into the idea that people feel that they're sent by the Lord to do this work the way Isaiah was sent by the Lord to do this work. But you don't seem to have that same level of concern that the audience in the United States and around the world is going to interpret this as these military soldiers of ours are responding to the Lord's call to go and do the Lord's work the way Isaiah was responding to the Lord's call to do the Lord's work when the President of the United States compares their response to that Isaiah 6 passage. You don't see it quite so
No,
starkly.
I see it similar to Genesis 22, where God calls upon Abraham to take his son, the only one, the one he loves. And Abraham says, Hineni, here I am. Exodus 3, where God calls upon Moses. Moses says, here I am. Look, George W. Bush began the issues in Afghanistan by misapplying the idiom crusade.
Yes.
And he was immediately warned. That was gross and inappropriate. I understand you would like to keep religion and the public civil government separated. I agree with you. I don't disagree that if I were on the speech writing team, I would have raised my hand and screamed, no, don't do it. However, as I said when I got on, I think we're dealing with someone who is a grieving father. He wasn't just the president. He certainly wasn't very political. This guy has been roasted from before this all fell apart. He couldn't have done it right.
Yes. Yeah.
Could not have done it right. You began to see his anger with whoever the idiot was at the end when he was reminded that the construct of this began because of Trump. So, in an idealized world, I agree with my pastor. Please don't mix discourse. I'm mitigating. I don't think this is a manipulation of religious text, Doug.
Oh.
I think he is truly a religious man who sought through the filter of his own parental. Why does anyone volunteer? It's a transcendent response.
Yeah.
For him, it's transcendent.
I wonder, Doug, if you and I have, because of the work that we do, if we have a bit of an allergy to Christian nationalism, that we get even the littlest whiff of it, and we start sneezing. And I think part of what we might be reacting to here is the fear that, I so appreciate what the rabbi is saying about Joe Biden being a grieving father, and I understand there's kind of this tradition of using these texts about service in a broad way. I think the fear is that people oftentimes in church, people use the Bible in a unreflective kind of way that it feels like, slapping texts on political positions to justify them. And I think we're so tired of that happening that anytime we get some whiff of that, because that's what Christian nationalism does, is it baptizes a political agenda in religious language. And I think that anytime we hear that happening, it's something that sets us off, because we have seen, we've seen January 6th and the insurrection that happened. Like, we've seen that happen so often that we're nervous about it.
Okay, you might be right, Rob. I mean, look, I may have an allergy, but I think this is more like I'm having a reaction to a toxin than you and I or others have an allergy. I think there's a toxin at play when we try to say that our military functions in the world should be seen in some sort of biblical languaging. Look, I'm even nervous when people say things like, well, if our military goes in the world, they should go in a Matthew 25 kind of way, and do unto others, we'd have them do unto you, and bind up the brokenhearted and heal people. Like, that's not even what we should be doing. The motivations for who we vote for and how any of us want to act and what we understand as goodness is one thing, but to start using specific texts to say what we're now doing as a government is what the Lord calls us to do, if you're in the Isaiah passage, or what Jesus teaches to do. And I'm not just playing some generic separation of church and state, right? My problem here is not that, because Joe Biden was not trying to stop a civic religion or start a civic religion. It's not, to me, a separation of church and state. It's trying to say that you're tapping into the American psyche, because you're doing this at a time when you're trying to explain to the American people what our next steps are going to be. We all watched that speech because we wanted to know, what are our next steps going to be? So in this context of how should we understand where we are, what we're going to do, and what the future looks like, to take that moment and utilize biblical texts for such purposes, I think is just stepping us into a space that that is overly dangerous. Now, people are watching on the video stream. You see that Shane is no longer on, Rob is no longer on. These people are just disappearing as we go. So, Joseph, it's you and I for now.
You are correct to warn us. Absolutely correct to warn us. It is a slippery slope, and both of us would have preferred the President of the United States not to draw upon any biblical language and text. Completely agree. He did.
Yeah.
And it is an attempt to valorize a transcendent act of service.
Yeah, I mean, see, I get you, Joseph. I hear you. Let me just rant for one more second. You can talk me off the ledge that I found myself on here with this, because everyone on every side of this thing in Afghanistan, by these definitions, volunteered, offered themselves. I don't want to hear someone tell me that the suicide bomber who turned himself into a murderer offered themselves as a sacrifice and picked some passage from the Quran or from the Jewish scriptures or from the Christian stories to start using that to talk about how they were how it's valor to be a suicide bomber or something, right? The idea that we start to use, because every side could use these texts to say, yeah, people have offered themselves up for the function of their cause or of their country. And that doesn't justify claiming, especially when you're the president of the United States, claiming, and I'll just rant for one more second, you talk me away from this one. Not everyone who volunteered for the military did it because they wanted to offer themselves to the service in an Isaiah-like fashion. There's lots of reasons people are in the military. So even to sort of bathe all military engagement from the United States as if it's, everyone in the military, what they're doing is offering themselves in an Isaiah-like, unto the Lord I will give my life passion. That's not even the case. So I can't seem to grab any handhold by which, even on volunteerism, we should be doing that with our military, or we should be invoking scriptural texts in acts of human on human warfare. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, I want to try one more vantage point, and I want to retrieve Pastor Doug Pagitt.
Okay.
Sometimes those of us who do respond and are called to to ministry are asked to use language for the problem of funerals, of offering solace in a grief that has no justification and anguish. And I don't know, maybe if the two of us were called by family to help bury any of those who have died,
Mm-hmm.
we might draw upon scripture that is an exaggeration of a political reality. We do so because we are trying to help those who can't find words
Mm-hmm.
to resolve their grief. While I was listening all day yesterday, I thought of the horrific act which has been mislabeled and abused as suicide.
Mm-hmm.
You and I both know, because we've buried suicides,
Mm-hmm.
and we have dealt with the survivors of suicides. In the aftermath of something like this, these people are triggered. Imagine anybody who has buried someone they love, and those suicides, people have died of a mental illness. Yesterday, as you correctly said, was an act of murder, not suicide. It was an act of murder in which the murder weapon was the body. I so wish that the word suicide would be removed. So, my friend the prophet, Doug Pagitt, is correct in warning us. No, I came on to congratulate you. You are correct to warn us. The intent is not ill. I don't think Joe Biden is the scammy, slimy, manipulative person that his predecessor is. So for whatever reason, he drew upon a text I wish he hadn't used. You are correct in warning us. This is a slope we can't get off of. There's nothing good that will come when others abuse a text he well intended but should not have used. So we can offer our corrective interpretation.
Right. That's right.
Be it valorizing a transcendent opportunity or a funerary exaggeration, fine. But we have to warn people that there will be people, Christian nationalists. This whole thing, as you just said, is wrapped up in extreme misapplication of religion.
Yeah.
And so, do you want a warning of why you should stay away from Scripture? There it is.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good way to say it. Yeah, this shows that difficulty. And look, I am first of all, every president is not above reproach and is not above critique. And anyone who thinks that supporters of a president should stay silent when they see some action that they think is inappropriate, I think that's not the way we should function. I will do everything I can to reelect Joe Biden if he runs for president, whether it's against Donald Trump or anyone else. I'm all for the guy. I was almost going to wear my Biden-Harris shirt today. So all this stuff in the chat, or if you're thinking, well, these are people that just are critiquing the president, I'm actually trying to critique an argument of Christian militarism and religious militarism that Joe Biden is stepping into, not that he even created. In fact, I don't know. I'm going to do all I can to find out what the process was of how they got this part of the speech, and I know there's people working hard on this. This is not even a Joe Biden problem. Joe Biden, as the president, used this argument yesterday. He didn't create it. He's not the creator of the idea that the military is connected to Isaiah 6 call narrative. I've been hearing that for years. And look, when Jeff Sessions chose to quote the book of Romans to justify family separation, I sat in the very place I'm sitting now, looked into the very camera, and said, you cannot do that without some people who hold those scriptures and take them seriously, raising our voices about it. This is inappropriate use of the text and inappropriate justification for what you're about to do. But that wasn't only because he was, I think, an attorney general under a corrupt president. It's because that actual usage of those passages to justify that government action is inappropriate. This is what we have to deal with all the time. You know, around our work, as Rob reminded us, we do a lot of work around Christian nationalism, spend a lot of time, energy, and money trying to separate out the strands of our religion from our nationalism that get birthed together into religious nationalism, of which Christian nationalism is the most dangerous in our current context. You can't do that only for one party. You can't be committed to helping us not conflate our shared religious and civic nationalist identities if you're going to say, well, I'm going to give a pass, and I'm not saying you're saying this, Joseph, but the conversation I've been having over the last day with a lot of people are saying this. Well, Joe Biden intends good, though. So if he means well and then uses some religious nationalism for the point, then that's okay. It's all about the intention. It's not all about the intention. It's actually using this as the fundamental argument. And look, there's no words spoken by a president in a moment of this level of urgency that was not intentional. Mm-hmm. So if this had been a casual off the cuff, you know, for whatever reason, the presidents choose to talk to reporters with helicopters spinning behind them so you can barely hear them. If it had been one of those shouted from a press question responses, that would be one thing. This was a prepared speech of 9 minutes and some odd seconds to shape how we're going to respond as a nation moving forward. And it was invoked in the middle of the speech for very specific intentions. So this is just of a different ilk here. This is, and again, it's not just a Joe Biden problem. It's larger than that. So Rob, I know we dropped you for a minute. Do you have anything left to say in our final moments?
I could have some kind of, inappropriate joke about, someone not wanting us to talk about all this. Yeah. Doug, you're absolutely right that I think that there is a different reaction if this was just an off the cuff comment. The word teleprompter was trending yesterday on Twitter because Joe Biden was getting so much criticism from Republican and right-wing critics who, were giving him a hard time for using a teleprompter for this speech, as if like every president doesn't use teleprompters for like speeches of this magnitude. So this was definitely something that was prepared. It was definitely something that was chosen on purpose. And I think it is really ill-advised. I think that it demonstrates a lack of awareness of how these types of things have happened in the past and the impact of them and how they have spurred Christian nationalism. I think it's like, what? It's a passage about service. It's no big deal. But yes, but when you use the Bible this way and you equate military service with, the call of God, like there's people who hear that in a much different way. And in a climate where Christian nationalism literally caused an insurrection, a violent insurrection that led to the deaths of American citizens in the United States Capitol, like we've got to be sensitive to these things. We have got to be aware of this, and we've got to dial back this stuff because it has had really, really negative consequences on our political system.
Look, I think that the work you guys have done and continue to do is, and I've said this, it's prophetic. You are anchored in a way to be the only people I know with the credibility to say, nope, this text, it isn't just a source for tweets. You have to know every text has a context.
Yeah.
And this was not the right context in which to draw upon it. Yes, we are proud of those who volunteer to serve our country. But let us be able to do that with language and a source that cannot then be abused. And that's what Robb was warning us. So thank you for having me on. And
thank you, Rabbi.
You know, I'm always there to help give you the other perspective.
So great. So
Well,
great.
Look, Rabbi, I can convince myself of all kinds of things, and when it comes to these passages, your words sit deeply with me. So, thank you, Robb, and to all of us. Look, find the common good every way we can, and we'll find our way forward. So, thanks, and to all of you who are engaging so deeply in all the text today. In the texting today, we're really glad to have had you along with us. We're deeply committed to the call of the common good, and all of our presidents, all of our civic leaders, all the people who offer themselves to public service are called to that standard. And each one of us knows our industries, right? And we know our expertise. And when someone in political power uses our areas in ways that they need help to understand them differently, you should offer your service that way. So whatever it is you do in the world, you should, have a keen ear to it. And a few of us are very, whether we're, as Robb put it so well, whether we're have an allergic reaction or we just know this stuff and we know how it's playing out. We do not want to be, in my view, narrating our actions in the world as if we're in some sort of a military action that has the blessing of the Lord on it. My own view is when we move into any military action and are going to kill one of the children of God in the world, we need to do that without the belief that that very God is calling us to do that. Yeah. I don't know how someone sees someone as a child of God unless they're in another country with a different intention than ours, or regardless of what they have done. So I don't know how we reconcile that. I don't know how we prevent evil from spreading and from damage and from violence from being catchy. I just know that violence breeds violence. And I know that baptizing it in the name of the Lord is extraordinarily dangerous. And boy, we have to call this out every single time. And Joe Biden 2024. Totally comfortable saying that too. Right. And I'm being a little snarky and a little sensitive about this because I know for so many people, any critique of a president somehow means they've lost your support. Rob, unless you want to say something more about this, I just want to say something about how we do approval ratings in the United States, because it has something to do with this. When the press puts out something and says, "Do you approve of the president's behavior in Afghanistan?" And you'll see no, he's got 25% approval rating. Some people are like, "Oh my gosh, that means only 25% of people are going to vote for him again." It doesn't mean that at all. All of us vote for mayors, city council members, maybe school board members, presidents, Congress people, for whom we don't agree with them on every topic, for whom we might not even agree with how they have behaved. If the idea is that if you don't 100% agree with a president on everything the president does and says, then somehow you're not supportive. Well, it's just not how it works. I'm not even going to lecture you about it shouldn't be that way. It's just not true. Of course you don't. You're going to vote for people that you disagree with how they've handled certain things, and you'll get to a preponderance of the issues and decide, is this person someone that I can vote for? Look, I am supportive of everything Joe Biden has done around this Afghanistan situation. What I'm not supportive of is using a biblical text to justify people's participation in the military, and even those who die in the military, and then to follow that up with, we will use the military to hunt down and to make people pay. Those are that is a danger level that needs to be stopped. But that doesn't mean that you don't support a president. So when people feel this coming up in them, like how could the Vote Common Good people, how could the Common Good podcast people say something about the president they don't agree with? Well, we sure should. We want him to be the best president possible. I want Joe Biden to be the best president. And if he doesn't use these passages anymore, that would be better than using these passages. That's a better version of the president. So may we all do what we can to be sure that our president is hearing from the American people. And you and I are the American people, and we should be speaking out. And don't let your support of a president put a muzzle on you when you need to speak out to help the president become a better president.
Exactly.
That was pretty good.
Right.
I kind of like that.
Yeah.
I hope I believe that. I hope I believe that in the future.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else, Robb Ryerse?
No, I think this is a critical thing for us to be aware of. I mean, there's a lot of lessons to learn, and that we've highlighted them. I think it's important to remember that, like, people are not above criticism. It's important to remember that we live in a culture and a society that is so rampant with Christian nationalism that it's just the water we swim in, and it's easy to not recognize it, and we've got to be aware of it so that we can we can squelch it, because it's been such a detrimental thing to our country and to our politics. And that work continues no matter where it pops up, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. Like, we have got to call this stuff out.
Well, good Friday, everyone.
And I'm with you. I have zero regrets about working hard to get Joe Biden elected, and I, if I had to do it again, I would do it again.
Yeah. All right, I think we've said it.
Yeah,
I think we got there. All right, we'll talk to y'all. We'll talk to y'all next week. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of this. Thanks for all your comments in the chat. There's hundreds of them. Sorry we couldn't get to all of them. Appreciate it.